Good evening. My pleasure and my privilege to be here and to be part of this evening. I'm just going to name it. I'm far too old to be part of this service. I'm basically ancient, as the young people like to remind me. But I've been asked to be part of this service, and I'm going to be sharing a little bit now, and in a little bit, Hannah Parkin, one of our young people, is going to be continuing to share. We've been working on this together, and really, this is something that comes from her heart, and I'm sort of helping her to communicate it. And so I'm doing part one, and in a moment, she'll be doing part two, and we'll be doing something a little in between as well. But the passage that as we were talking and praying that we sort of felt was right for tonight is quite a famous passage in the Bible. It's a time when Jesus walks on the water, and his disciples get to experience that, and one of them joins in with him in that. So that's what we're going to be looking at this evening. And it's a passage which, if you don't have a Bible and you'd like to be able to follow along when I come to read it in a moment, then do stick up your hand, and some of our wonderful welcome team will come, and they've got the Bibles here. Now's the time to put your hand up if you want. There we go. We can see a couple of hands. Great. So this is a story that came to life for me in new ways about 4 years ago. And I'll be honest, I didn't realize one of the people involved in this story was going to be here tonight. But this is a story about being caught on a boat in a storm. This happened to me in a very spectacular way when Ben Parkin took me out on a boat. Guy was there as well, as were a couple of others that you might know, Josh Bryant and Ollie McMullen, for those of you who know. The five of us went sailing, and we were promised a glorious time. It was wonderful. It was great. We were going great guns, and then the weather turned miserable, absolutely horrible, completely unforecast. We were about as far out as we were going to go. The weather turned, the wind turned, and we were trying to make it back to shore, and the wind was against us, and the boat was not managing to get very far. We had the engine on full pelt. Then that conked out, and we had to try and fight the elements without any engine at all. And then right in the middle of this whole thing, literally one of the sails on the boat tore from top to bottom. It was heroic. We were so impressive, and I'm sure I've built it up in my memory far more impressive than it was. But this was, in all seriousness, it was scary. It was not scary because we did have a qualified and very capable skipper at the helm, but it was scary. I didn't know exactly what was going to happen. We were completely at the mercy of the elements. So as I read this story, that's what it evokes for me. I wonder what it is that it might evoke for you. It's Matthew chapter 14 we're going to read. And I'm going to read the first little bit, and then Hannah's going to pick up the rest of the story later on. Matthew 14, starting at verse 22. Immediately, Jesus made the disciples get into the boat and go on ahead of him to the other side, while he dismissed the crowd. This is just after he's fed the 5,000 people. After he dismissed them, he went up on a mountainside by himself to pray. Later that night, he was there alone, and the boat was already a considerable distance from the land, buffeted by the waves, because the wind was against it. Shortly before dawn, Jesus went out to them, walking on the lake. When the disciples saw him walking on the lake, they were terrified. "It's a ghost," they said, and cried out in fear. But Jesus immediately said to them, "Take courage, it is I. Don't be afraid." Like I said, Hannah's going to pick up the rest of that story later on. There are a few times in the Bible when there are big storms. Think of characters like Jonah. Think of other times in the Gospels when Jesus is with his disciples on the lake, on the Sea of Galilee, during the middle of a storm. And whenever there's a storm in the Bible, there's always a deeper significance to what's going on in the minds of those who would first read these stories. Because for the people reading these stories, the sea and the waves and the wind and big bodies of water were seen to carry a sort of ominousness about them. There was something darker, there was something deeper going on. That was because, if you think about it, nowadays we can relatively safely travel across the seas. We've got big ocean liners. We've sort of tamed the sea. Back here, going out to sea or traveling on water was a perilous thing, and sometimes you didn't come back. And as a result, in people's thinking and in sort of Jewish thought, the sea had become almost a symbol. It was taken on symbolism of being signifying sort of darker forces or things that are against us. And so when we read of stories of storms and of the sea in the Bible, there's always that connotation going along as well. For the disciples, this was a real storm. This is not a myth. This is not a legend. This is a real story that happened. But as we read it, we can also think about what it might say about this kind of the metaphorical storms in our life. The things that are dark, the things that are against us, whether that's situations, whether that's things we struggle with, whether that's our own flaws or failings. The situations we find ourselves in that are tough, the things that are against us. What was the phrase that was in the passage? The boat was already a considerable distance from land, buffeted by the wind, the waves, because the wind was against it. This is a story about people on a boat, and there is something against them, something that threatens them, something that is causing them potential harm. So that's where the disciples found themselves, and the truth is we all find ourselves in that kind of situation from time to time. Maybe not a literal storm. Maybe it is that, but maybe it's not. But we all find ourselves facing things that are hard, things that are against us. For these fairly seasoned fishermen and sailors, they would have been used to these situations, and there would be some storms that they would have seen coming. They'd be able to see on the horizon the weather was coming and do something about it and prepare themselves. There are other kind of storms that we've kind of faced before. Yeah, we've had that thing happen to us before, and we think we know how to deal with it. These people would have been used to storms. They knew what to do. They knew everything that was within their power to try and get the boat back to shore. Sometimes that would be enough. Sometimes it wouldn't be. But they'd faced it before. And then there's these other storms that we face in our life that are totally out of the blue. Things that we just don't see coming, and they knock us for six. What kind of storms are you facing tonight? What kinds of things are big in your life? What are the big things on your horizon that you can see coming? What are the things that might be against you, that are holding you back or pulling you back? What kind of things are going on for you? Of course, what happens next in the story is something that I didn't get to experience when I was in the middle of my boating adventure. The next thing that happened is truly spectacular. Jesus left his quiet place of prayer and comes to them on the water. Jesus actually comes to them on the water. I mean, wow, just for a moment on that. That's incredible. But if we again dig under this a little bit and look at the maybe deeper symbolic meaning of this passage, for the people who first read it, as they thought about the kinds of storms that they might face in the rest of their life, what does this say? Well, before we get to the bit where Peter gets to have a little walk on the water as well, that Hannah's going to explore, we see that Jesus comes to them. In the middle of this storm, in the middle of these things that are against them, he comes to them. He's not too busy to do that. He's praying, that's important. He's taking a break from the crowds who have been following him and following him and following him. That's important as well. He needed to rest. But he wasn't too busy. Neither of those things were too important for him to stop and come to people who were in distress, come to people for whom there was something that was against them. He's also not against us. He's not too busy for us, and he is for us. It might be that there are things you're facing and you think, I feel completely alone in this. I don't know how to cope with this. I don't know how to deal with this. Jesus is for you. The winds may have been against them, but Jesus was for them. He came to them. He came to them in that very moment of distress. He came to exactly where they were. And he spent time with them. And he looked after them, and he ultimately helped them. Their first reaction when they see him is, because they're in this situation, this headspace where everything is against them, where everything is going wrong, where it could only possibly get worse because this situation is awful. And so they see this figure and they scream, it's a ghost. They can't imagine that something good could come to them in the middle of this storm. They're so rocked about by it. They're so disheartened by the situation they're in that they can't even recognize that Jesus is the one coming to them. Whatever it is we're facing, Jesus wants to come to us. And what does he say? He says, take heart. It's me. Don't be afraid. Whatever it is that we're facing, big, little, scary, slightly indifferent, something we've faced before, something completely out of the blue, something we think we can handle, whatever it is we think we're facing, whatever it is that's going on in our life, Jesus is not too busy. Jesus is for you. And he wants to come and say, look, it's me. I want to be with you in the middle of this. That's what I wanted to share from this first little bit of the passage. And I'm going to invite Annie to come up, and she's going to lead us in what we're going to do next. Thank you very much, Annie.
Amen. So, hi, I'm Hannah. So we left this story at the point of where the disciples just saw Jesus. So let's read the rest of this true story. Matthew 14, 27 to 31. But Jesus immediately said to them, "Take courage, it is I. Do not be afraid." "Lord, if it is you," Peter replied, "tell me to come to you on the water." "Come," Jesus said. Then Peter got down out of the boat, walked on the water, and came towards Jesus. But when he saw the wind, he was afraid, and beginning to sink, he cried out, "Lord, save me." Immediately, Jesus reached out his hand and caught him. "You of little faith," he said, "why did you doubt?" Tonight I'm going to talk to you about 4 different scenarios within this story that you might be going through in this season of your life. Still on the boat, holding on to the boat, sinking, and walking on water. Because walking on water, is it just me, or does that sound like an awesome thing to be able to do? Jesus did it, Peter did it, and we're invited to do it too. We're invited by Jesus himself to step out of the boat, out of our comfort zone, into the unknown, into a life where Jesus is the center, to experience the adventure of a lifetime. But to walk on water, you have to be willing to get your feet wet first. Only then will you truly know that it was worth the risk. You have to have faith and trust that Jesus will catch you. You need to keep your eyes on him. But what if you don't? What if you decide that it's best for you to stay on your boat? What then? If you choose to read Matthew 14, verse 33, it talks about the other disciples, and we're reminded that it was only Peter who was bold enough to actually step off the boat. I wonder what's going through the heads of the other disciples at that time. Why didn't they get off the boat? Maybe it was self-doubt, thinking that they weren't worthy, that they couldn't do it. Or it was disbelief. They didn't truly understand that Jesus was there in front of them walking on water in the middle of a storm. Or maybe it was self-preservation. 3 of those left on the boat were experienced fishermen. I'm sure they'd seen the result of a man overboard, let alone in a storm, and the others would have heard the terrifying tales of those lost at sea. So it makes sense that they'd look at Jesus, but then look at the lake of Galilee, and then at their boat, and probably be thinking the same thing we all would. I am not getting out of this boat. Because when Peter got out of the boat, he doesn't ask for a promise, like, "Lord, promise me I won't sink if I follow you," but for a command. "Lord, if it is you, tell me to come to you on the water." He doesn't ask for a guarantee, just an opportunity. The other disciples obviously wanted a guarantee. They'd calculated the cost of getting out of the boat and had decided that the possible risks were too high. The possibility of sinking, of being ridiculed, of criticism, and maybe even worse. What they did not do, however, was work out the cost of staying in the boat. The cost of missing an opportunity to start that adventure of a lifetime. The cost of becoming just the spectators on the sideline. The cost of ignoring Jesus' call in your life. In many situations, we work out the risk of doing something, but not of doing nothing. That risk of doing something, but not of doing nothing. Because if we open our eyes to the amazing things that God is doing in the world, we're given so many opportunities to step out of our boat and start that awe-inspiring journey where we walk with the King of Kings. And you will keep being given those opportunities to step off that boat. Because as it says in 2 Peter 3 verse 9, "The Lord is not slow in keeping his promise, as some understand slowness. Instead, he is patient with you, not wanting anyone to perish, but for everyone to come to repentance." God does not want anyone to perish, but for everyone to come to repentance. And so he is patient with us. He does not yank us off the boat into the deep end. He just waits and asks us to trust him, to take those small steps towards him. Because small steps are all we're asked to make. We're not told that Peter jumps off the boat, sprints towards Jesus with his arms open wide. No, he got down off the boat, walked on water, and came towards Jesus. And I can imagine him doing it quite cautiously too. So let's just freeze this scenario for a moment. As he gets down off the boat, just as he's about to let go, but hasn't just yet. This is where I find myself, where I think many of us find ourselves. I've gotten out of the boat, but I haven't let go. I'm unwilling to let go. The boat can represent many things in our lives. Our comfort zone, a habit, good or bad. Or maybe your boat represents your control over your life, and you're afraid to let go, afraid of the unknown. For me, my boat is my insecurities, the I can't do it, I'm not good enough thoughts. They are the things that I cling on to. I want to step out for God, but I'm not willing to let go of my past mistakes. I'm not willing to forgive myself. I try to walk with God while dragging my boat behind me. And once again, we're reminded that he is patient with us. He will not force us to let go, but because he loves us and he created us and he knows us, he knows our strengths and our weaknesses. He knows that we're not made to pull our boats behind us. He knows that to reach our full potential, we have to let go of our boats. That is why Jesus died on the cross, so that he could lift our burdens, set us free from that habit and of our old lives, and to bring us out of our comfort zones, to encourage us to grow in faith and understanding. But you have to willingly give it to him, just as he willingly gave up his life for you. You have to choose to acknowledge Philippians 4:13. I can do all things through Christ who strengthens me, as he chooses to call us his children, his friends. But sometimes we may not feel like that. In some seasons of our life, we may feel lost, unnoticed, like we're sinking. This happens when we stop focusing on Jesus and we focus on ourselves. We focus on not being able to do it. When we look at the giant waves towering around us and the storm of the world raging against us, when we focus on the wars and the famines and on those who have lost so much, everything seems without hope. You start sinking into the sea of despair, into the inky darkness of the depths, like Peter did in verse 30 of the passage. When he saw the wind, he was afraid, and beginning to sink, he cried out, "Lord, save me." Because no matter how dark a situation seems, there's always light. No matter how despairing it seems, there's always hope. When all seems lost, there is a way. When you feel like you're surrounded by lies, there's the true truth. When you seem enclosed by death, there is the life. Jesus. He is our hope, our light, the way, the truth, and the life. We've all been in, when you're sinking, he immediately holds out his hand for you to choose to grab. You have to allow him to help you out of the water, to pull you up out of that hopelessness. Because we've all been in those situations that seem without hope. But things are only without hope when we don't focus on the source of the hope, the source of our power and peace. And as John Ortberg said in his book, you can't live without hope. Hope is the fuel that the human body runs on. Hope is what prompts people to stand before a preacher and promise I do, even though they have no guarantees. Hope is why human beings keep bringing children into a fallen world. Hope is why there are hospitals and universities, and hope is why there are therapists and consultants. No composer would agonize over a piece of music without the hope that some glimmer of beauty will emerge from the struggle. No parents would agonize over a child without the hope that the child will live a better, nobler, happier life than they did. Because what would the world be without hope? The true, steadfast hope. What would your world be like if God didn't hold out his hand for you to grab and so that he could pull you up out of the despair? What would your world be like if your eyes weren't opened to the hope in a situation so that you can be at peace? Turn your focus back to your friend, the King of Kings. He will not condemn you or tell you off. He will point out what went wrong, but so that you can fix it together and grow as a person and in your relationship with him. When Jesus says to Peter, "You of little faith, why did you doubt?" He's like any good teacher, wanting Peter to learn from this experience. Because what does God want you to learn from a situation you were in yesterday, today, or maybe one that you're dreading this week? God does not make bad things happen to us, but that doesn't mean he can't use them for good. So that you can learn something new about yourself or about another person. Or maybe so that you can relearn something that in the busyness of life you've forgotten. That you are loved, you are forgiven, you are beautiful, you are unique, you are chosen. Having confidence in who you are through Jesus is one of the key things for walking on water. It was when Peter began to doubt if he could do it that he began to sink. And once again, the verse from Philippians 4:13 comes up. It's what we can do through Christ and who we are through Christ that allows us to walk on water. Because who do you say you are? Unimportant? Unloved? Nothing special? I don't know what you think of yourself, but I do know what matters most, what God thinks of you. Loved, unique, spectacular, delightful, snazzy, worthy, wanted, someone who plays an important part in God's plan. He believes in you. He knows that you can do it with him. So you should believe in yourself too. Because although for just us, many things are impossible, with God, all things are possible. Because walking on water is awesome. Jesus does it, Peter did it, and in Christ, we can too. Whether it's sharing our faith or standing out as an ambassador for Christ in school and work. Or maybe it's to be willing to follow Jesus wherever he leads you, whether it's on water or on land. As Will comes up to lead us further, I want to challenge you with something. Where are you in this story? Are you still on the boat, not listening to God calling you? Or are you still calculating if it's worth it? Should you ask God for boldness to step out? Have you gotten out of the boat, but you're struggling to let go of it? Should you ask God for wholeheartedness? Are you sinking and you need to pray for hope? Or are you in an amazing season of walking on water with Jesus and you should pray for preparation for wherever you are led? Or maybe you're somewhere in between, because only you and God know where you truly are tonight.